And today I'm going to talk about training for the Honolulu Marathon. And that's sort of almost a joke, but the reason I got interested, and I'm making it interesting to you, is I never really thought about it, but if you don't train specifically for the Honolulu Marathon, you can't run it. You can go out there and collapse like everybody else. And as a matter of fact, we know that soccer players or volleyball players or the different athletic teams from the University of Hawaii will show up the week of the marathon, and they all drop out at about the 17-mile mark. You see them walking, and they went out faster because most of them had sprint training, but when they hit the 17-mile mark, they had to start walking, and then whereas the people here can continue at their same steady state pace, and as a matter of fact, you pass all these people. So when you did the Honolulu Marathon last year, how many of you completed last year's marathon? Okay, well, the median finish time in last year's Honolulu Marathon was 8 hours and 45 minutes. They didn't have the number of runners they said they did, but they did have about 16 or 17,000 runners. So that meant that even if you were a slow runner, say at a 9-hour pace, when you got to the halfway point, you still had half the people to catch. And I found that rather interesting. Here we are, I was reading an article in a medical journal and said, when you exercise for 10 minutes, you set thousands of different enzymes into production. And I thought, gee, that's sort of interesting. What would happen if I went out for 20 minutes? And it turns out, you get the same enzymes that are type specific to help you with that. But it turns out that none of these enzymes are specific for the marathon, because marathon is a pure endurance event. A 1-mile run is primarily aerobic or anaerobic. A 10K run is mixed. It's half anaerobic, whereas a marathon is almost entirely aerobic. In other words, you're burning a set of enzymes, and if you don't have those enzymes, I don't care how good you are, you're going to be walking. Now, and those enzymes are pretty powerful. If you look in the Honolulu Marathon, there will be at least one person over the age of 80 that breaks 3 hours. We know in world-class running, we've had runners who were in their 90s and 100 who completed marathons, and some of them have completed in under 8 hours in the 90s. And that is almost medically spectacular to think that this can occur and the changes that are occurring. And when you read the medical journals or the regular journals, they all tell you how to exercise, what to do about this. And they sort of treat exercise as a generic, like exercise is good for everything. But it's not type specific. For example, swimming, you say, I think I'm going to run a marathon, or I think I'm going to run a 10K. We'll go out and do base training, do road work. I think I'm going to box. I think I'm going to do gymnasts. They all put base training or road work at the bottom of that, whereas none of them put swimming. I mean, who can imagine? I think I'm going to get ready for the marathon. How are you doing? Well, I'm going to train by swimming. See how that works. You won't go anywhere. Yeah, you can be a world-class swimmer, and nobody can even get close to you. So what you're doing, and it really made me smile with pleasure. It made me very proud of this group, because you fall into a unique group of individuals who are competing in an athletic event that can't be done unless you've trained for it. And of course, to do that, you have to join the pain PTA, which is pain, torture, and agony, to get to LSD, long, slow distance. But I assure you, after your 3 or 4 months of training, the pain never completely disappears, but it diminishes. And if you, at the end of 3 or 4 weeks or 3 or 4 months of training, you still are uncomfortable, then you would perhaps want to look to some other form of exercise. Now, only one person raised his hand as having completed last year's marathon. How many are first-timers here? Okay, first-timers, and first-timer means, and how many are first-time marathoners? Okay, and how many ran, oh, and nobody ran last year's marathon here, is that right?
No.
Oh, okay, okay, all right, but not very many, so you're all approaching this year's marathon, not as a beginner, but as a new experience. And I think that's important to think about, because this year is going to be a truncated event. And you're going to have to decide, can you do it or can you not? Now, when I talk about marathon training being specific, it's the 1 hour 3 times a week. If you go out on a regular run and you decide to quit after half an hour, 45 minutes, you don't get to count that run. It's the 1 hour. So you're better off going out 1 hour 3 or 4 times a week, or even better is getting more than an hour in, going out an hour and a half one time less a week. In other words, getting in the same miles, but getting more rest time. And if you think about it, you know, when the world-class runners are training for the marathon, they train at about 5 or 6 minute pace, and they run 60 to 80 to 100 miles a week. That's only 8 or 9 hours of training time. How interesting. It takes swimmers have to train 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the afternoon, whereas marathon runners, you get to be world-class in training 10 or 12 hours a week. That's really just phenomenal. And yet they can't do it without training for this. So you are a very unique animal. You can be very proud of yourself. And the other thing is, you can show up anywhere on the United States and show up to a race, and you can find the ones that haven't trained, finished the marathon, or haven't trained. You can go out and you can take them all. So you're guaranteed. Now, when you run the marathon, if it's your first marathon, remember, you don't have to talk about your training time or about your finish time. You set a PR. And so you learn how to talk runner's lingo. So you're sitting there talking, they have you run, oh yeah, I completed the Honolulu Marathon. Oh, what was your time? Geez, you know, I can't really remember. But all I know is I set a PR. And they'll switch off to something else. And you haven't lied, you haven't told a misnomer. So now we're heading towards this year's marathon. And what are you going to do? Well, I don't know how many miles each one of you are running. We know that people that can run 30 miles a week comfortably for 2 months before the marathon, and then slow down by 15 or 20%, complete the marathon. So, and you do have an entry fee out there, and it is expensive. It's over $100, and it goes up again in a couple of weeks. So I think if you're going to run it, and you feel pretty good about it, you probably should enter. If you're in doubt, you might want to wait. Then of course you'll pay an additional amount. You know, the runner's numbers are specific for the person who buys it. However, you know, some people do give their numbers away the day before the race. So, but you don't have your own name on it, you're not represented. That's sort of no fun. What I'd like to suggest is you think about your mileage, and if you have a copy of my book, you don't need it. But you have a training program. You notice that when you started training in March, we had 1 hour 3 times a week. This is very simple. March, April, May, and then 1 hour 4 times a week. And assuming you were doing a 10-minute pace, that would be 24 miles a week. Then you go in the 5th month to 30 miles a week. So basically, you could be starting today and still get in that first 5 months and still have a month or 2 to train. So the probability of the people here who are training today, doing it properly, entering and completing the Honolulu Marathon is better than the public at large, and much better than those who have trained who think they're training. But what you want to do is make sure that every run is at least an hour. In other words, you have that hour. I know you're all up to that. I would prefer that you run not more than 4 days a week, because injuries get to be a real problem. And I'm going to be giving a talk on injuries later. It'll be sort of similar like this. But and people say, well, how do you know about injuries if you haven't had injuries? Well, I ran the first 26 Honolulu marathons, and I averaged under under 4 hours in most of those. And so it means I was able to show up at the starting line 26 years in a row to run the marathon and finish and run the race. So I think I know a lot about injuries, about how not to get injured. And I never ran more than 5 days a week, ever. So I would prefer that you start working towards 3 to 4 days a week and increasing your miles. Maybe 3 days a week is a little too short. You might want to do 4, but that would be it. And then you start adding up your miles, seeing what you're at. If you're over 20 miles a week, or you're getting close to that, you're going to do all right, because then on the week of the marathon, if you do our quickie trot, you'll be able to decide whether you can stick to your game plan or not. So basically, I would say here, 99% of you have the marathon, the potential for the marathon in your body right now. And so I think, and then with your team leaders and your program, you'll be able to work out what you think you need to add on to. But I would remember 3 or 4 days a week, 30 miles a week, and getting it up and following that. And I'll be back down again in a few weeks, give another talk, and then you can ask questions at that time. I'm good on the internet, and I'm good I'll try and return calls if I get any, particularly those that have medical problems. I know you've been told to get a treadmill, see a doctor, get a good cardiovascular clearance, and I reiterate that, particularly because I have a family history of heart disease, cigarette smoking, or things like that. Well, I've taken 17 minutes, which with the add-ons, that's about right. I'll turn it over to Peter, or I could try and answer a question if there's a specific question about training for this year's marathon. There being none, we will break up.
Oh, I have one.
Oh, yes, sir.
So, what do we do with the heat? Because we practice early in the morning, and if people are taking 5 or 6 hours, it's going to be hot.
What time? I did most of my running in the morning. I live on Round Top. I had a group I ran with. I'd run from Round Top down around Diamond Head and back. That's 17 miles. I was only out there 2.5 to 3 hours. And so so I start running at about 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and I got home. Since I'm self-employed, I could safely go to work at 8 o'clock.
So I should start the day before then.
Huh?
Start the marathon the day before in the dark and the cool.
Yeah. Well, it's still hot. First of all, one of the hottest days in the Honolulu Marathon was early in the morning, and it was a killer of a day. What to do about you could get a long run on occasion on a Saturday or Sunday.
Midday.
But I wouldn't worry about that. You're pretty well heat acclimatized and heat trained already. And we have not, considering the size of the Honolulu Marathon and the relative lack of experience, particularly with the Japanese coming in, we're coming from a cooler climate, the number of cases of environmental heat illness is small. That used to be one of my fields. And when we did a study on the marathon clinic one year, and measured the temperature, and they were out there a long time. And they ran slow enough, they didn't overheat at all. Overheating is a problem when you're a 3 or 4 or 5 hour marathoner. But if you're out there all day, fatigue and dehydration would be a bigger one.